Good morning. Welcome to the forum. It's good to see all of you this morning. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. I'm very glad to see all of you here today. As many of you know, each year we choose a theme for inspiration, and in 2019, our theme is the body. I think many of us, when we think of the word body, think of sex and desire. And for many of us, we experience sex and desire and we're formed by the movies and theater. How has film as art, entertainment, and business reflected American culture? What does it get right? And more importantly, what does it get wrong? Our guest today has been described as the greatest living film critic and historian. That's pretty high praise.
It's not what I said.
Yeah. I'm going to go on record as agreeing with that statement.
Oh, all right. Good.
He is the author of well over 30 books about film, including the Biographical Dictionary of Film, Moments That Made the Movies, The Whole Equation, and the pioneering novel Suspects, which was peopled with characters from film. In 2014, he received the Mel Novikoff Award from the San Francisco International Film Festival, given annually to an individual or institution whose work has enhanced the filmgoing's public knowledge and appreciation of world cinema. His latest book is Sleeping with Strangers, How the Movies Shape Desire, and that is the focus of our conversation today. Please join me in welcoming David Thomson.
Thank you.
One of the things I appreciated so much about your book was the autobiographical details. I just felt like I was really connected not only to the films that you described, but your impressions of them, and especially from the very beginning. So whenever people ask me this week, I'd tell them I was talking with you, I would say, I'm talking to a man who in his 20s would see 12 films a week. That there were weeks that you'd see so many films. And I was wondering, maybe you can talk a little bit about what your first impressions of film were when you were a child, and what effect it had on you. In one section, you described just having just such a strong reaction to film. It's almost like you had to be taken out of the theater and you were responding so strongly.
Absolutely. I was overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience, by the sort of the ravishing reality of it, feeling you were there and wanting actually to be up in the screen. And I was terrified by it too.
Yeah.
I didn't understand how it happened. At first, when I was I don't know, 4, I thought there were actually people behind the screen.
Right.
I didn't understand the mechanism of film. And one of the very first films I saw was Olivier's Henry V. And that would have been 1945. I was 4. And my parents took me because that film was regarded as a sort of patriotic duty.
Right, exactly.
In Britain. And I didn't really understand very much of it. But there is a scene in the second part, at the Battle of Agincourt, where the French set fire to the English camp, and page boys are burned alive. And I believed I had actually seen page boys on fire.
Right.
What I had really seen, and what I discovered 10 years later, was that it was a superimposition with 2 bits of film. It was page boys sleeping in the tent and fire, flame.
Right.
Now, I had no idea what a superimposition was. I regarded the screen as a unity and something that was actually happening. And I literally had to be taken out of the theater crying. And in those days, and with that film, the theater was packed.
Oh, yes.
Theaters were packed.
Right.
I looked it up before this event, and the theater where I think I saw that film held 3,000 people.
Wow.
And regularly, you might not get in because the demand for films in those days was so immense.
Right.
So, taking someone out of a film in the middle of the screening was a fairly big thing. And my father, who had to do it, was very aggravated because he wanted to watch the whole film. And then when I got out in the lobby, I said, "Oh, you've got to take me back." Because I was so enraptured by the experience that although I had been terrified, I had to renew that. And I still feel that, actually, in films. When a film really works for me, I have that mixture of rapture and fear at the same time.
You know, our son is the same way. He was so sensitive to the loud sounds.
Oh.
And it's funny, you almost forget that it has that intensity of experience.
Well, that's the thing. And, you know, when we see a film these days, invariably we see it on our own home screen. I was raised in a world, and several of the people here will have been, where you were with 2,000 people, not an uncommon size of audience, and the screen was as big as a building.
Right.
And when the face was on the screen in a close-up, that face might have been 20 feet high.
Wow.
You know, the power of that is something that has almost faded away from film going, and that's the way of the world. But it was an overwhelming experience for me, and I knew from the age of 4 or 5, I think, that it was the greatest thing I was ever going to see.
Yeah.
And I still have that feeling in me.
Yeah, and I do too. I'm just so surprised when I run into people who don't have that resonance.
Well, I know, and I find that very sad, because there are kids for whom going to the movies is well, why go to the movies? I can see it on my phone or something like that.
It's so strange to me that they don't find it special.
I know, but there we are. Most people here, I think, I would judge, remember the big screen.
Yeah.
Good.
So when you were a teenager, what was your film experience like then? I mean, you constructed your understanding of the world in part based on your experiences in
Far
the
too
cinema.
much, yes.
Yeah.
My experience was I was at school, and I was being raised to go to Oxford or Cambridge, because that's the way my school worked. And I was going to get there, I think. And I was seeing as many films as I could, which in South London in those days would have probably been 3 films a week.
Yeah.
That was all. And my mother was very worried about it. She thought 2 things. I was probably neglecting my homework to go see the films, and also she thought that I was getting upset by them, because it was clear I was very emotionally involved with them.
Yes.
And I think she was trying to sort of bring my intensity down, which is a forlorn task for a parent.
It is.
But she said, well, if you insist on going to see all these films, you've got to write something about them. And I said, what do you mean? I didn't understand the idea of writing about films. And she said, well, people review films, and they actually write sentences trying to describe what the film is. And if you're having such a great time there, I want you to try and put it into words.
What a lovely woman. I mean, that's great.
She had many qualities.
Yeah.
She said she read the reviews I wrote. I don't think she did, but I don't think that was the important part of it. It was the discipline.
Right.
And really the education in thinking here was an experience that seemed intense and visceral, emotional, and beyond words that I might control. Not control, but I might convey in words. And I guess that's why I'm here today.
Right. I taught a class on film in college.
Yes.
And we would have weekly assignments of seeing the film and writing a review.
Right.
And it was hard to teach the students that the critics, there's nothing magical about being a critic, that their analysis of the film may have, see things that the critics don't recognize.
Yeah.
But I mean, from the very beginning, you knew that you could write about film. One of the things I feel from myself is writing about film for me is just very difficult. It's hard to give people the details that they need to have in order to have a sense for it, and yet not meet a different audience that may have seen seen the film also.
Yeah.
Like what are some of the challenges? Like what makes good film writing?
I think good film writing makes you want to go and see the film.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all it comes down to. If you read a paragraph of, say, Pauline Kael, or Graham Greene, who was a film critic before not before he was a novelist, but very early in his life he was a film critic, and a good one. I think it is saying something about the film that makes you think, oh, I want to go see that. And of course, it's so much easier now to see a film like that because you could get it streaming, you can get it on DVD. So much easier than it was when I was a kid, because when I was a kid, the only films really were the new films.
Right.
So I think
So once it happened, that was it.
Yeah, a film came on and it played in South London for a week, and it was gone. I learned that if I went south of South London into what's called Surrey, the county of Surrey, I could see it for another 2 weeks, because generally films opened in central London and moved out.
Radiated out.
But then after about 2 months, they were withdrawn. They were not seeable anymore. So if you loved a film, you really better go see it often. And I started seeing films more than once, which my mother thought was insane.
Right.
I mean, ridiculous. You know the story, she said. But of course, the story was not always what was so compelling to me. Another difficulty, by the way, in film writing is not to tell the story.
Right.
People justifiably complain of some film reviews, oh, you told me what happens.
Right.
And they can't bear that because they are waiting to find the ending on their own. And it's a totally fair complaint. It's a problem for the film critic or for the film maniac, because the film maniac is tuning in to things that are sort of not just story.
Right.
If it's just a story, it could be printed on paper. But what's getting to me and to people who are crazy about film is the movement.
Right.
It's passing time. It's the difference between close-ups and long shots. It's the music.
Right.
You know, it is so many things that are beyond the storyline in itself. And the truth is, certainly in the days when I was young, films told very few stories. There were sort of like 5 or 6 storylines that got repeated over and over, so that if you went to films often, you could say after 15 or 20 minutes, oh, it's this story.
Right.
It's the story where John Wayne does something. And if John Wayne's in the film, you know, whatever the difficulties, he's going to achieve what he sets out to achieve. So there really isn't the suspense that the medium is trying to tell you there is.
Right. I remember just the section you have on Bonnie and Clyde, and just writing that you saw it something like 5 times in that week.
Bonnie and Clyde was a film. I was working in central London, and it opened at the Warner Theatre in Leicester Square, which was a very short walk from where I worked. And I just stopped working. I saw the film 5 times in a week.
Yeah.
Because it moved me so powerfully. And I mean, I would say now, looking back, probably that was the moment when I knew, although I had no idea how I would accomplish it, I knew I had to come to America.
Right.
It was a passion that deep. I sort of felt I have to be there.
Right.
The being there in the screen or in the world that the screen is showing was an enormously powerful thing for me.
That's so interesting. I went and watched all the sections. There's, on YouTube, and it meant so much more to me because I saw how much you cared for it and loved it.
Well,
and
good.
It
Thank
helped
you.
me see details that I would never have noticed otherwise.
But I mean, there are people, young people today, who have never seen Bonnie and Clyde.
Right, exactly.
And probably never will.
Right.
Which is okay. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way of the world. You can't do too much about it. But it was one of a number of films that meant an enormous amount to me.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about ahead of time, is that this is the first time I've read a book where I could just look at all the people you mentioned, their images, their photographs, see clips of the films. I've never done that before in reading a book. It's almost like I had you and YouTube going at the same time.
Well, a very big issue in doing a book about film is how you illustrate it.
Yeah.
Publishers want you to illustrate it until they see the bill for the
Right.
pictures
Yeah.
and the picture rights. And then they get very conservative and very cautious about it.
The
But,
pictures really help.
well,
In this,
I
I mean,
would
it's a
love
visual
to,
image,
I would
yeah.
love to do a book that was very close to a movie.
Yeah.
So that as you were reading, you were looking at pictures all the time.
Yeah.
So there was almost a picture on every page.
Right.
That kind of a book seems to me the ideal way of covering this subject, but it's a very expensive way of doing
Yeah,
it too.
it is.
So there's a problem.
So who are some of the teachers that helped? I mean, because you've described so compellingly that kind of visceral experience of seeing films. So who are some of the teachers who helped you to kind of see it from another perspective?
Well,
You know what I mean? There's like that visceral experience, and there's that kind of the analytical position.
yeah. Well, I don't want the writing to be analytical or academic. There's no question that Pauline Kael was an immensely powerful influence on most film writers of a certain time, because she was so excited herself.
Yeah.
And she conveyed that. I mean, when she reviewed Last Tango in Paris in 1972, it was fairly clear that she was very close to orgasm herself, seeing the film. And I think later on in life, when she looked back on the film, she sort of thought, well, calm down, girl. Calm down. It's not quite what you said it was. But still, I'm so glad she wrote with that intensity, because I think that's what it requires. The other thing that meant a great deal to me was that in the late 50s, I discovered a magazine called Cahiers du Cinéma, which you could buy on the Charing Cross Road in London. Had a bright yellow cover. And my French was not up to it, but I read that magazine, and it was, I think, as far as I could work through the French, I think it was talking about films I loved in a language that seemed to me to be right.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a few years. I had a friend that I worked on it with, and we had a French dictionary with us all the time.
Right.
And I didn't really understand all that they were saying, but I felt the passion. And then, and this was the miracle, it was really a tremendous education. In a year or two, the people who had written these articles and reviews, names I did not know at the time, they turned out to be François Truffaut,
Oh, wow.
Jean-Luc Godard, Claude Chabrol, Eric Romer, Jacques Rivette, the major figures of the French New Wave,
Right.
because these people started making their own films. And they did it when I was like 20 in film school. And I thought, my God, there really is a way that this enthusiasm I feel can turn into actual filmmaking. So that was a huge education for me.
What has been your connection to the actual filmmaking? I mean, it's interesting because your mom started you off on this path of writing criticism.
Yes.
Have you ever wanted to be closer to the production of films? I mean, you have been at certain
Oh, yeah.
points.
No, I mean, I have wanted to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I would still love to make more film. I went to film school. I was technically totally inept. And I couldn't even load a camera. This is in the days when you had to load a camera with film, which is not the easiest thing in the world, although far easier than it seemed to me. But I was with a group of kids there, students there, And they could do the technical work, camera, sound, editing, in ways I couldn't manage. But when we came in on a Monday morning and said, well, we've got all this equipment, we know how to use it, what should we make a film about? I was the one in the group that said, well, there's a big prison close to the school. Suppose we made a short film about a man coming out of prison with a suitcase carrying his things, and he finds the sound and the bustle of the city increasingly threatening.
Right, right.
They said, what a great idea. And we did it, and it turned out okay. But I was the one in the group who had ideas for what you could do. So I got sort of shunted into being a screenwriter. And most of what I have done in filmmaking has been screenwriting.
Yeah.
And if you're a screenwriter, you learn early on that most of what you write will not be filmed. That is in the nature of the film business. There are about 10 scripts for every one that ever gets done. So a lot of what I've written did get done, but some of it has been done. But you know, I still look at the world, I look at people, and I think, well, how would I film them?
Yeah.
What is their good side? How do you look at a person and understand them? Because that's really what you have to do. You have to know how to film someone so that you penetrate the surface.
Right, right.
And that's second nature to me still. And I think it is to all natural film people.
How did you learn about the world of film that was before your time? I mean, you know, you write about the silent films and you write about Rudolph Valentino. I mean, where did you learn that body?
Well, my university, I didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge because I turned down that place. I turned down Oxford, okay.
I was the right
I went
call.
to a film school, and the one thing I learned at the film school was to go to the National Film Theatre in London, under Waterloo Bridge on the South Bank, which was the great film museum archive in the country. It still is. And go there and watch everything they were going to play. So I started seeing, not everything, but most of what they were playing. And I started organizing in my mind a history of film. There weren't many good books that helped you with that, but there were so many films and so many directors I knew I had to pursue and follow. Right. So I just started seeing a lot of films. And, you know, for several years, I was seeing between 300 and 500 films a year.
Wow.
And
do you have a way of cataloging them? I mean,
yes. I mean, I used to keep a full list of all the films I saw. I even wrote notes on them.
Right.
And a lot of that material proved very valuable when I started to write books and reviews and that kind of thing. I've reached the point where, alas, I will sometimes be sitting with a movie and I will be 15 minutes into it and I say, I think I may have seen this before, but I can't remember. I can't remember what happens in it. But yeah, I was a searching encyclopedia myself of film, and it was a very, very exciting time because it was in the 60s that film began to be recognized as an academic subject.
Right.
That saved my life economically because I could be hired to teach film. Now, before 1960, there were hardly any places of higher education in this country that taught film. None in England at all. So, you know, that came along at just the right moment, and it was an amazing stroke of fortune.
Yeah, definitely. It was great timing for your passion and enthusiasm.
And of course, then about 15 years later, video came along, which meant that you had access to an increasing archive of film that you could not really see in the theaters.
Right.
And that has become the mainstay of our lives. But I think it's going to change. Some of you probably have big libraries of DVDs, and you may be beginning to discover that they who run our lives, they don't actually repair your DVD player anymore. They don't even really want to sell you one. Because we're not making those anymore because everybody is streaming. And streaming is a wonderful thing. You can watch Babylon Berlin in a weekend. But streaming depends upon the commercial choice of Netflix or Amazon, basically, as to what they have available.
Right.
And there's a lot available at the moment, but I'm not sure that will last, because I think they will have the films that play commercially, so that if you want to see a Soviet silent film of 1926, you can see it now, but I don't know how long that will go on.
Yeah.
So the archive could be withdrawn over time.
Right. One of the things that you write so much about and that we think so much about is just like the role of sex and desire in film.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just give us a thumbnail sketch, a kind of a history of sex and desire in film.
Well, the thumbnail is not the best part of the body, maybe, for invoking.
Right, that's a good idea. Maybe.
Well, look, I mean, let's be very simple about it. I started really watching films in 1947, let's say, when I was 6. And it was clear to me that falling in love was a very big part of what a film story was about. Because even if it was an adventure, even a war film sometimes, the hero was going to come back from the war, and there she would be waiting for him, more or less. And that was an extraordinary education about the nature of romance. I mean, I observed my family, my immediate family, and my parents did not seem to me were in love.
Yeah.
And that was a big loss for them, but for me too. I wanted them to be more in love than they seemed to be. In fact, my father left my mother when I was born. So it was a big issue. And I thought, well, I've got to fall in love once I grow up. Right. I didn't know how far I had to grow up to fall in love, although around the age of about 12, things were happening in my body that began to say, well, I think the time may be coming. And my mother said, you can't fall in love when you're 12. But what a 12-year-old does then, physically, was a very big problem that no one attended to.
Right.
I mean, at school, we learned about reproduction through the rat. But I didn't sympathize with rats. Yeah. And what we were told about your body, to go back to your main subject for this time, it didn't sort of affect the way I was getting, I didn't know the word yet, but I was getting erections watching some films.
Right.
And it seemed to me that the films were trying to get me to have an erection.
Yeah.
It wasn't an improper thing. But nobody would talk to you about it. I'm not sure that the situation is any better today. I think parents still have a terribly hard time talking to their children, maybe talking to each other about this kind of thing. One of the issues I get at in this book a lot is that sex, desire, need a conversation. And we're not good at that. We're not trained in it. But, you know, when I look back, I would have to say that the movies I saw in what were probably my most formative years taught me male superiority and female obedience.
Right.
As simple as that.
Yeah.
And I didn't question it at the time. I didn't begin to question it until probably the 1970s. But the problems that our society is facing now with people like Harvey Weinstein have a lot to do with that period of time, the first 50 or 60 years of film history, when sexual behavior and the limits of desire were laid down in a medium in ways that people hardly realized was happening. And I think we still have a population that is struggling to emerge from that. I think that allowing men and women to be and feel equal and talk to each other naturally about the most important things is still a desire not yet fully achieved.
Yeah.
And a lot of that problem has to do with the influence of the movies.
Right, right. You talk about the male gaze often in the book, and it's something that definitely comes to us out of the world of film. Could you talk a little bit about what the male gaze is, and then maybe talk about just what it means both on screen and just kind of in the production of films too?
Well, the male gaze owes itself to the fact that men literally owned and ran the film business. There were a few women who got to have important positions in the early days, but even they had to make films that conformed with the male gaze, which was to say basically, white men, because it was very much white men, looked at the world and saw it and believed they understood it, and they told stories about it that they hoped would pass into the main bloodstream of the culture. And they did. And they were films about male achievement, male bravery, male wisdom, so on, more things than that, but those things that really went unquestioned and led to a culture which by the middle of the 20th century was, I think, in a great crisis. It affected not just sex, it affected race, it affected so many other things. It affected attitudes to homosexuality,
Right.
where there was an enormous pressing need to grow up. But so much in the culture was saying, no, you don't need to. You don't need to depart from the ways that we have been laying down for you. And film in that respect had a very malign influence on all of us. What it meant in films was that a woman to play a leading part in a movie, if she was not comic, had to be what was termed, and what the audience would term, beautiful and sexy. Now, I grew up thinking beautiful was an honorable, noble, fine word. A part of me still thinks it is. I mean, I think, for instance, Steph Curry will sometimes do a beautiful three-pointer.
Right, right.
And there's a physical grace to it. There is an accomplishment to it. There is a timing to it. There is just a delight to watch. And you watch and you say, oh, that was beautiful, Steph.
Right, right.
A man calling a woman beautiful in film criticism or in real life is a very complicated thing.
Yeah.
Because I think, in truth, what the man is saying is, I like your looks. I'd like to sleep with you. How about it? Now, it need not be as crude as that. It need not be as blunt as that. But I think that set of suppositions is there, and it's painful for the women. It's painful eventually for male culture too. And it has led to a lot of men in this country being like our leader. And
that's one of the things you write so much about. I mean, so there's so much that happens on screen, and then there's so much that happens off screen too.
Yes.
And there's that misogyny and the sexism.
well, a kind of slavery.
That kind of slavery.
I mean, the charges that were made against Harvey Weinstein, which I imagine you're all fairly familiar with. Two things about it. One, anyone close to Harvey Weinstein for years knew that those charges were correct and tried to avoid noticing them or thinking about them. Two, that condition had been going on for generations. Women got into pictures because they were sexy, which meant they had to be sexy.
All women are sexy. Women are sexy.
Well, okay, but the cinema says some women are really sexy because they look like movie stars. I agree with you. I mean, Donald Trump said, women are special. Women are not special. They are all terrific, or not, or whatever. We don't have gradations of sexy and special. It's a continuous plane. The movie said some women are amazing to look at. Therefore, they're amazing. Now, if you meet a few of them, you know that they may look sensational, or whatever word you want to put on it, but they can be very dull. As dull as you and me, which is fair enough. But a code was set up to say these people were special, and therefore, if you were a young person, a young woman, coming alive in this society, maybe you needed to get slim and get your skin fixed and your teeth fixed and your hair, because that was the only chance you had to find a place in the society, to find a husband, and so on. Now, slowly, we're emerging from that tyranny, but slowly. And there are still so many ways in which the attitude of male superiority goes on. I was thinking about this last night, sort of trying to get in the mindset for this conversation. And I remember in the 1960s how life was changed by a very simple technology, the birth control pill. I mean, the birth control pill, in a matter of a year or two, allowed you to find that sex could be pleasant for its own sake, a revolutionary breakthrough. But the pill was something the woman had to take. So that if the woman forgot to take the pill, she was blamed for being thoughtless or forgetful. It was a female responsibility. There is still not really a male pill, although there could be. But men, we are told, well, men wouldn't really do that kind of thing. They wouldn't take a pill. They wouldn't interfere with their own virility. But women were expected to interfere with their own fertility. Now, that's a situation that probably most people in this room have had some experience of. And it's a manifestation of an attitude to superiority and subservience.
In the book, you talk about James Toback. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yes.
That must have been a very difficult chapter to write. And it must have just, I mean, these last 3 years, it made me realize just like what a weight you must have felt. And not only this friendship that you have, but other people who are in that business and who you admire. I mean, what has it felt like for you to have, the public scrutiny so much on these figures that you know so much about?
Well, it's a very, very difficult situation. Take another case that will be more familiar. We've probably all of us seen Kevin Spacey on screen quite a lot. And you may agree with me that he's an extraordinary actor. He has a full Oscar and a supporting actor Oscar. I've seen him on stage. I saw him in The Iceman Cometh on stage. He was as remarkable there as on screen. Now, I will say that instinctively, watching him over the years, I felt he might not be the nicest man on earth. I felt that there was a kind of mischief in him, a darkness that could be unpleasant
Right,
in
right.
person. That was just an instinct, the kind of thing you pick up when you meet people,
Right.
generally. It's clear now that Kevin Spacey behaved badly. There's a trial coming up, and I don't know how that will turn out, and we will have to see. However, I was shocked when his participation in a not very good film that came out a couple of years ago called All the Money in the World, where he played J. Paul Getty, if you remember. Very late in the day, after the film had been finished, the people behind the film decided that they should strip him out of the film, replace him with Christopher Plummer, a good actor, because the audience was so put off by the idea of Kevin Spacey that they could not continue with the film. Netflix abandoned one of their most profitable enterprises, House of Cards, because they thought the same way. Now, I thought stripping him out of that film was a bad thing. They cast him in the film. They believed he'd done a good job. And then they introduced a different standard, and a very perilous standard, in that I will tell you, if you really wanted to apply the standard of bad behavior to American filmmaking, there's an awful lot of people you would banish in the way Spacey has been banished. And I find that disturbing and upsetting, no matter that he may deserve rebuke. And there is an hypocrisy attached to it. For instance, Netflix would not do a 6th season, I think, of House of Cards, but they still sell the first 5 seasons, in which Kevin Spacey's quite brilliant rendering of nastiness is the centerpiece.
Right, right. I wonder too. Just one of the things you write is that you began the book really focusing on GLBTQ people in film and on film. And I wondered. I mean, it seems like it's almost like the book had to change because so much was changing around you. But what did you learn about GLBTQ people in cinema? As a result of some of the thought and work that you put into this.
Well, historically, gay, lesbian people had an enormous amount to do with filmmaking. And they were drawn to it. They found that they could work there without being victimized. There were a few cases of victimization, but not too many. A lot of great work was done by people whose sexual nature and status would have been a shock to the public. I mean, for instance, I lived through the 1950s. I was young, I was naive, but I wasn't stupid. I never dreamed that Rock Hudson was gay. And Rock Hudson in that period was probably the biggest draw at the box office in the world. And a lot of that sort of life was going on within the filmmaking community. And it was not appreciated, it was not noticed. And arguably, gay filmmakers had more freedom then than they have had more lately, when it's much more possible to identify them and respect them and praise them for what they're doing. There is so much muddled thinking about sexuality in general, but particularly in the movies.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned is just that that almost anyone can be gay except for these top male actors. And I was wondering what you...
And so many of them have had a gay life.
Yeah.
Not entirely, but they have had it,
Right.
I mean, there's a chapter in the book where I talk about probably the actors who meant the most to me growing up. James Dean, Montgomery Clift, Rock Hudson, Burt Lancaster, Cary Grant. And I would not say that any of them was simply gay, but all of them were occasionally gay, rather in the way of anyone who feels it's their right to make some experiment, to find out who you are, you know.
Right.
Now, in the world, it's a little easier now for people to find out that they have a sexual taste, a nature that is beyond what the norm of society requires or requests. It was much harder once upon a time, and there were tragedies because of it. I think Rock Hudson, who was an earnest man who wanted to do better work, I think what happened to him was tragic, not just in the way that he would die of AIDS, but of the secrecy under which he lived, the way in which he was required to marry his agent's secretary, who would be a mask for him so that it would not seem apparent that he was gay, when everyone in his circle knew that he was gay.
Right. One of the traditions we have at the forum is people write questions on cards for us. And so there may be a few questions. One of the questions I had that we hadn't covered yet, Donald Trump grew up in the same film-growing universe that we did. What were the films that would have influenced how he looks at the world? What connections? He comes up like 3 or 4 times in the book. How was he influenced? Like, were gangster films an important? What can help us understand Donald Trump better from the film world?
First thing I would say is that the one thing Donald Trump can do is hold the camera for an hour and a half. And I mean it. He's terrible on the teleprompter. He's dull. You feel he's bored. But you put him up live in front of an audience. It's terrible, but it's extraordinary too. He is a stand-up president. And that comes from a man who's watched a lot of films, a lot of film performance.
Yeah.
He has said, and I hate to admit this because we have a shared choice, he has said that his favorite film is Citizen Kane. I would love to talk to him about it. He's never gone further than that. I think that for someone of his age, the crucial film, and it's true of the whole executive class in Hollywood, I think it's true of a great range of male society, was The Godfather. The Godfather is a way of saying this is how men together can run the world. This is how they talk to each other. This is how they look at things. This is how blind they are to everything, how they shut women out of the room, how they will kill their own brother in a crisis, in a pinch. And The Godfather is one of the most complicated of American films because it is so brilliantly made. I mean, part 2 is even better than part 1, I think. Those 2 films together are a landmark in American film. And I will only say this, that I know a lot of people in Hollywood, not necessarily filmmakers, but executives, producers, agents, lawyers, who act as if they're in The Godfather. They wear those clothes, those suits, they talk like that. They use tough lines to get through life. And I think Donald Trump watches those films a lot. That's my guess.
Yeah, that's great. How did the transition to showing movies in large format, dark communal spaces to TV, small screen, private spaces, carry out or further the shape of our desire?
That is a huge question that I talk about all through the book. I think that in the 20s, 30s, and 40s particularly, there was an extraordinary communal experience in going to movies. You went with a mass of strangers. You laughed with them. You trembled with them. You knew you were having a shared response to a film. And the cinema, the movie house, whatever you want to call it, was probably the place where most people spent real time with other people. And it was a great thing about the movies. The closer we have got to small theaters, screening rooms really, many of which are going. The Opera Plaza, for instance.
I know, I was so
think the Opera Plaza is going to close. I think there's going to be a run of theaters closing because there is no question we prefer to sit at home with what is a very good screen. There are very good domestic screens now. They're not as big as old movie screens, but the pictures are of a very good quality. It's more convenient, it's warmer, it's safer, it seems cheaper, and it's lonelier. Yeah. I think film watching has become a more solitary experience. I've just written a piece about watching Babylon Berlin with my wife, in which I say, I think it really was one of our best, most intense experiences watching it together, talking about it. But that was just the two of us, you know. Now that's a great thing, but I can't remember the last time I saw a movie in a packed theater where you could hear people crying, or you could hear people laughing in ways that made you feel you were part of a society. Yeah. And generally, I fear that our sense of society is diminishing.
What do you think is the future of film? I mean, there are a whole bunch of questions I had about that. Just like, what will it be like in 20 years from now?
In 20 years, I think the only theaters will be museum theaters, university archive places, the Pacific Film Archive over in Berkeley, places like that. I'm not sure there will even be big roadshow theaters. I think there will be no theaters, essentially. And I think people will watch at home, and I think they will watch in a much more fragmented way. They won't watch whole movies. They'll watch things. They'll watch, I don't know, they'll watch a trip to the Canyon de Chelly. They'll watch a piece of pornography. They'll watch an endless film about a river flowing past. All of those things have extraordinary, visceral appeal and charm to us. And I think we're breaking away from story more and more. There will be stories which will be clearly the children of the kind of long-form television shows that we now binge on. But I think there will be a great variety of things. A lot of it will be special effects. Once upon a time, films were the record of things that had happened. If Humphrey Bogart walked across a room, it was Humphrey Bogart walking across a room. Nowadays, you could do anything in a film. You can have Humphrey Bogart walking across a room. You could actually have Bogart compiled from his old movies, walking anew across the room, and the floor of the room could be crowded with cobras. And Bogey, in his characteristic way, wouldn't be afraid of the cobras because Bogey was not afraid of things. And the ability to do anything anyone can think of has really diminished the power and quality of reality in films. But you know, I think as a society, we are giving up on reality. I was talking to someone earlier today about the Access Hollywood moment in Trump's career. And we said, you had to be very naive and unaware of what is happening in this country to think that when that tape came out, if you remember it, he would be destroyed. And I said it simply polished his patina, because it's not as if people don't know that Trump is a scoundrel and a fraud. I think even his base know that. They're charmed by him. The reality of his life, his business, his career is almost out of reach. I'm not sure that Mueller and all the other people who are going after him are going to be able to produce a story that will absolutely convict him. I think he has a dark stardom that may rise above the facts.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Just we have such an odd relation to movie stars.
That's right.
And he's one of them.
That's right.
Given the inequality in the film industry, what would you change to increase the roles of women?
Well, film is a business. You can't make a film without really using someone else's money. And when you're using someone else's money, you're totally compromised. And it's very difficult to lay down laws about what you will do and won't do. I think big steps are being taken to bring women more jobs, more opportunities. But it's still a long way from where it should be. And here's the other thing. We're still living in a culture where the male gaze is dominant. Television commercials, which are movies, are all made in the male gaze. We need to discover, and I don't think it's clear yet, what the female gaze is, what the female way of looking is. And once we know that better, then I think it will be easier and more natural to make films that women are really not just directing, but are owning. It's very difficult. And I'm not sure the business of film, of movies, will last long enough for it to be accomplished.
Could you talk more about why you think movie stars today still feel like they can't come out?
Oh, a very simple reason for men, for male movie stars, to come out in the way that, say, Rock Hudson never did, they feel would destroy their career. And we're talking about an earning power of, major rank. And it's very hard to encourage someone to put their career in peril. Yeah. I think that there are some people who are in that situation, but it's absolutely commercial reasoning that makes it hard for them to come out.
As a well-behaved nerd who skipped school one day to see Alain René's Mon Oncle d'Amérique, do you have a word about that film, please?
Oh, gosh. I haven't seen it for a very long time. I think Alain René was a great director. Hiroshima Mon Amour is one of my favorite films. I don't think he ever made a dull film, but I would need to see it again to be really more helpful than that.
Do you think this generation of cell phones has contributed to the lack of romance in relationships, i.e. Paul Herod and Ingrid Bergen? You can look at it if you want to.
Paul Henry and Ingrid Bergen.
Oh, that's good.
It's too late to really get into cell phones, iPhones. I think the iPhone is as terrible a self-inflicted crisis as Brexit. But only a dictator who would incur immense wrath from the public and from the companies who have vested interests in the phone. Only a person like that would have the power and the will and the confidence and might survive assassination by saying, withdraw the cell phone. We are the victims of our technological ingenuity. We keep inventing things that I think destroy a great deal of what we value in life. Now, I'm not a Luddite, I'm not anti-technology. The water closet is a big advance on what went before it. But I think when you see people who cannot live without checking their cell phone 10 or a dozen times an hour, and who walk down the street bumping into people, perhaps walking into traffic because they are reading their cell phone, I think that's a madness. But it's a madness that is not going to be corrected. I think the phone is actually, this may sound horrifying, but think about it carefully. I think quite soon it's going to be physically implanted in the hand. I mean, you all know you drop the phone, you drop it in the loo. My wife's done it twice in the last 3 years. You know the problems with the phone. You forget where you put it. Well, we can deal with that. What else are you really using your hands for? I think that's where it has to go. Now, maybe there's another part of the body it could fit, but I think the hand is where it's going to be, truly. And that will be a measure of how far that technology has overwhelmed us.
In 30 years, there's not going to be anyone left who understands what you know about film right now. What do you think is going to be lost when that experience of those films there's no one has a living experience of it?
Well, look, I mean, there's no one alive really, I think. And I say this to you and in a cathedral. There's no one alive really who knows what it was like to enter a cathedral in 1300.
Right.
The quality of religious belief has changed. In many ways, there are positives to that because a lot of people got slaughtered in the name of that religious belief. But we keep abandoning our old experiences. It's in human nature. It's like people fall in love, and then they fall out of love.
Yeah.
Divorce is a very big legacy from the film business. And you can't prevent that. I think, if you're going to ask me seriously, I think global warming is going to wipe out the world by the end of this century. I think there may be no life on Earth. But are you really concerned about that when you know that for an incredible period of time, there was no human life before? Why should human life be so precious and essential? I don't think it is. Yeah. And there will be no one here to regret the loss anyway.
Right. That's right. Except for our pets.
Our pets. Yeah.
There's so much that I wanted to cover that we didn't get to. The Hays production codes and their effect on what we see, and even they're having the Academy Awards in 2 weeks, and I didn't even ask you what your hopes are for it, and if you see some great things coming up.
I think the Academy has become craven, corrupt, and I think they've lost their sense of what they're trying to celebrate.
That's good. I'm glad I asked you that.
There was talk recently that the Academy was going to handle the Best Cinematography Award. Cinematography, talk about the main line of what film is. They were going to handle that in a commercial break because the public don't know who the cinematographers are, and they don't really care. And we've got to get this show moving, and we've got to just have commercial breaks.
What about films from 2018 that we shouldn't miss?
2018?
Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, there was a masterpiece that actually opened in late 2017 called Phantom Thread. I think it's a great film. And something I've mentioned before, Babylon Berlin. Netflix, 2 seasons of it so far. I think it's an extraordinary work.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
in 2 weeks, we're going to be hosting Tamika Moss. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Hamilton Families, an organization nationally recognized for its pioneering homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing programs. She's really a dynamic person. You're welcome to join us also at the 11 o'clock service right after this. And then there are copies of Sleeping with Strangers. Lisa Mayotta's selling them in the back. Thank you very much, David. It's such a blessing to have you.
Lovely talking.
Yes, dear delight.
Thank you.